Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation's Economic Briefing. It's wonderful to have you virtually join us. My name is Ricardo Ruffalo, and I help oversee events and membership for the LAEDC, and I will be the moderator for this morning's webinar. Today, we are joined by LAEDC CEO Bill Allen, as well as from the Institute for Applied Economics, we have the director, Shannon Sedgwick, and our new associate economist, Alexander Specht. And now I would like to introduce the CEO of the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation, Bill Allen.
Thank you, Ricardo, and thanks everyone for being with us this morning. Welcome to the July 2021 Economic Briefing from our LAEDC Institute for Applied Economics. We've got a lot of new information to share with you this morning since our last briefing was in April, and we want to provide you a little bit of context before we begin. First, we share this news with you as our county public health orders have been revised once again to mandate the wearing of masks in all indoor settings, regardless of vaccination status. While none of us likes to have to wear a mask, our county leadership has taken this step to try to limit the once again rapidly rising number of new cases and hospitalizations here in LA County. While the health risks are clearly now almost exclusively to those unvaccinated in our communities, they are still real health risks. And once again, we find ourselves with hundreds of our neighbors in our hospitals with COVID-19. Should these numbers continue to rise significantly, there always remains the possibility of further limitations on business activity in our region. And that would be devastating to our still fragile economic and jobs recovery here. So please, from your friends at the LAEDC, please encourage everyone you know to wear their masks and to get vaccinated. Our economy does continue to recover here in LA County, as well as across the state and nation. But as you will hear from two of our economists this morning, job recovery remains modest, and preliminary state data for June employment gains were surprisingly lower than the trend for the prior 3 months. And that's despite the full reopening that took place on June 15. So now, more than 1 year since the depths of the job losses during the spring of 2020, when we lost more than 772,000 jobs here in LA County, we have still only recovered less than half of those total jobs lost to the pandemic. It's also important to note that though personal spending has fully recovered here to pre-pandemic levels, small business revenues throughout our entire state have not yet fully recovered. In fact, by one recent measure from the Opportunity Insights Research Project affiliated with Harvard University, small business revenue throughout California are still more than 40% below pre-pandemic levels. That's a really troubling number. It appears to be largely due to the fact that consumers shifted their buying behaviors to online ordering and deliveries from large national or multinational retailers like Amazon and Walmart and so many others, and away from patronizing our local neighborhood small businesses, especially when those businesses were shuttered during the stay-at-home orders. It remains to be seen how long this new buying behavior will last and whether we will ever return to the prior balance we had in patronizing our local small businesses. In addition, as we've been reporting to you over the past 15 months, we have seen and continue to see disparate impacts on the residents of LA County from this pandemic. High-wage jobs were never lost to the extent that low-wage jobs were, and they've essentially fully been recovered. While lower-wage job losses throughout the county were at a much higher rate, and they are still a very long way from full recovery. In some cases, this was because higher wage and professional workers were more able to work remotely from home during the pandemic, while lower wage and customer-facing workers in the most impacted industries were not able to do so. In some cases, it's because small businesses who formerly employed many of our neighbors are not yet ready or able to extend new offers of employment while their revenues are still down by more than 40%. In other cases, it's because offers of employment are not being accepted, while various financial incentives and health and childcare concerns are causing some workers to hesitate to return to full-time employment. I offer all this as some context to what you're about to hear in the latest data and to remind us all that our collective work in economic and workforce development, especially as it relates to the continuing recovery and reinvention of our regional economy, is far from complete. We have fairly consistently projected to you that the job recovery from the pandemic in LA County would likely extend through 2023 and possibly into 2024. And at the current rate of job recovery that we've been reporting for the last several months, that forecast we've been giving you over the past year is looking to be quite accurate. So please know that the LAEDC remains on the case in a variety of ways. Our Together for LA collaborative for small business recovery and resilience remains in full swing with a generous new grant from the Wells Fargo Open for Business Fund to the LAEDC and to our partners at the LA Area Chamber of Commerce and LISC LA, among other partners, including the City and County of Los Angeles, who've worked with us providing technical assistance and relief capital to thousands of small businesses. We've been at this work over the past year, and with the support of Wells Fargo, we're now funded to be able to continue this work over the entire next year, because all of us recognize this work is still desperately needed in our communities. And the particular focus this year is on small businesses owned by women and people of color, as they have been the hardest hit by this pandemic, and they were least likely to have the financial resources to be able to withstand the economic disruptions. At the same time, our Safer at Work initiative that we created with the County of Los Angeles continues its outreach to keep employers and their employees and the patrons of their businesses all safe in the workplace, especially in the communities deemed most vulnerable by the county. You can find out more about it and get resources through the saferatwork.la website. You may have seen radio commercials, print ads, street art, posters now in thousands of businesses throughout the region. But we've got to keep our businesses safe and open. Finally, our LA Digital Equity Action League has just been recommended by the California Public Utilities Commission for formal designation as the official regional broadband consortium for LA County to help bring universal high-speed internet to every household and small business in our region. That is part of our recovery. It is part of our reinvention. It is part of the long-term resilience for individuals and enterprises in our region. And it's a very important part of the work of the LAEDC and our now more than 100 partners in that regional broadband consortium. So we thank you for being with us today, for always being interested in the latest available data so that we can all make the most informed decisions possible as we continue our work to fully and inclusively recover from the economic devastation wrought by this terrible pandemic on so many individuals and enterprises in our communities. With that as context, it's my pleasure to turn the platform over to my colleague Shannon Sedgwick, our director of our Institute for Applied Economics, for the first of two reports we have for you this morning. Shannon?
Thank you, Bill. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for LAEDC's Economic Briefing. I hope that you and your families are continuing to keep well as we continue to make our way through the recovery process. Today, I'm going to give a brief economic overview and share how a few of the hardest hit industries have been performing, what their activity levels are. And Alexander, our new associate economist, will go over the latest local area employment situation in LA County, covering the month of June, and then compare job recovery in our county to other areas in California and other metropolitan areas across the U.S. So much has happened since our last webinar in April, most notably the executive orders, the stay-at-home order, and the blueprint for a safer economy. Those were both terminated on June 15th. There's now no physical distancing or capacity limits for businesses and activities. There's no travel advisory in effect. The good news is that our economy is open, and that gives us a lot of hope for what some of these numbers will be for this month. With capacity restrictions, a thing of the past, we are seeing that people are spending more time outside in Los Angeles. We see an increase specifically in retail and restaurant activity, and not so much an increase in workplace activity, so people are still operating remotely. The public transit is also showing about 33% below January of 2020 in terms of time spent on public transit, but people are starting to get back out there again. We're seeing the overall trend of consumer spending in Los Angeles going up. And we're starting to see that job postings are coming back. So job postings are real-time employer demand. And across all industries, we've seen that they've been increasing overall since the beginning of the year. Although we are down a little bit, 9.9%, you can see the volatility that exists. So we're looking at the trend, not the changes from month to month. When we look at small business revenues, we are seeing that even though people are out there, they're spending money, there are businesses hiring and posting jobs and hiring individuals back, that our small businesses are still struggling and are seeing reduced revenues in the state. So as of July, small business revenues in California are still down just over 43%. When we take all of this into consideration, we look at what we've adjusted our forecast, and we see that in Los Angeles County, we're expecting a significant amount of growth over last year, so 6.5% growth over 2020. And we anticipate that in 2022, we'll still see robust growth, again, as the economy recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic, with a growth rate of 5.2%. And then things start to temper as the economy has rebounded and starts to return back to normal. In 2023, we expect a 1.3% growth in GDP in the county. In terms of non-farm employment, we've been saying all along that this year our job growth will be returning people back to work. And so compared to 2020, we forecast a 6.5% increase in non-farm employment. And as things start to return to normal, we see a smaller growth rate in non-farm employment for 2023. Earlier this year in February, the LAEDC Institute for Applied Economics released a report for Los Angeles County titled Pathways for Economic Resiliency. And in there, we've identified multiple industries that were hardest hit during the pandemic. I'm going to take a few moments now just to look at the activity levels for these hardest hit industries that we identified in that report in Los Angeles County. We looked at retail trade as being one of the industries that were impacted the most, specifically non-essential retail. And we can see by looking at foot traffic levels that there was a significant dip in March and April when the safer at home and mandated closures were in effect for businesses, for certain types of non-essential businesses. But we also see that we are still well below what our pre-pandemic levels were in terms of foot traffic at retail establishments. We are seeing that there's some positive activity happening since the beginning of this year. We anticipate to see foot traffic increase significantly into July. Leisure and hospitality was an industry that was hardest hit, and not just for the hospitality side, which was accommodation, which was heavily impacted by a lot of travel restrictions, and food services, which has been highlighted consistently. But the arts and entertainment industry, which included amusement parks, bowling alleys, gyms, they were severely impacted during the pandemic, and with many not opening up until just recently. And so this is one that we're going to be watching closely to see what happens beyond that June 15th mark in the data. And you can see that there are renewed activity and increased foot traffic that are taking place at museums, historical sites, and similar institutions. Personal care services was another industry that we identified as being hardest hit. Businesses that were included in this industry were hair salons, nail salons, barber shops, tattoo parlors. And so again, with the safer at home orders, you see the big dip that took place at the end of March, the second half of March and through April. And those levels still have not rebounded to pre-pandemic levels. Next, I'd like to introduce our new associate economist, Alexander Specht, who joined the LAEDC Institute for Applied Economics in May of this year. He'll be presenting the latest employment numbers for you today, and we'll do a comparison of our recovery in Los Angeles County compared to other areas. Alexander, take it away.
Thank you, Shannon. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for LAEDC's monthly economic briefing. Today, we're going to go over the latest local area employment situation in LA County, covering the month of June. As of July 17th, the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health reported a total of over 1.26 million positive cases of COVID-19 across LA County, with fewer than 25,000 deaths. While the curve has been relatively flat the past few months, there has been an uptick in COVID cases recently. As of July 17th, the positivity rate, which has recently exhibited an upward trend, was 3.17%. The test positivity rate peaked over 20% in late December during the surge. Current hospitalization numbers are relatively low compared to earlier in the pandemic, but are increasing, with 507 people with COVID-19 currently hospitalized in LA County. The distribution of COVID-19 vaccines in Los Angeles County continues. The county has administered over 10.7 million doses of the vaccine as of July 11th, 44% of which were second doses. Vaccine eligibility categories have now been expanded to include anyone 12 and older who lives and works in LA County. When we look at unemployment insurance claims data for Los Angeles County, we see that while higher than pre-pandemic levels, unemployment insurance claims have settled to a lower level than earlier in the pandemic. The last 5 consecutive weeks have resulted in a decreasing trend in unemployment insurance claims. From March of 2020 through the week ending June 19th of this year, almost 6 million unemployment insurance claims have been filed in Los Angeles County. Since the start of COVID-19 crisis in March of 2020, around 48% of the California workforce, those in the labor force in February of 2020, has filed for unemployment insurance benefits. There has been a disproportionate impact on women, younger workers, lower educated workers, and Black workers. By April 17th, around 51% of women in the labor force had filed initial unemployment insurance claims for regular unemployment insurance or pandemic unemployment assistance since the start of the crisis, compared to about 45% of men. 16.1% of these claims filed in the county were in the accommodation and food services industry, followed by retail trade with 12.5%, healthcare and social assistance with 12%, and information with 9.3%. Recall that healthcare and social assistance includes home healthcare and childcare, which were significantly impacted during the pandemic, and that the information sector includes the motion picture and the television industry, where filming ground to a halt during much of the pandemic. The local area data release covering the month of June was released last Friday. We will go over the employment situation for Los Angeles County next. The resident labor force is the sum of the number of individuals employed and those who are classified as unemployed, people who are jobless, looking for a job, and available for work. The civilian labor force fell by 45,100 from May to June, to just over 5.08 million in the month of June. June is the 5th consecutive month where the labor force numbered over 5 million. Here we have the monthly unemployment rate in Los Angeles County. May 2020 had the highest unemployment rate at 18.8%. However, the unemployment rate in the county remained above 17% from April through August. The rate declined from September to November, increasing slightly in December and January as the health order reinstated restrictions during the second wave. February's unemployment rate declined, reflecting the loosening of restrictions when the regional stay-at-home order was rescinded statewide on January 25th. The unemployment rate remained relatively unchanged in March and April before falling in May by 1 percentage point. Since May, the unemployment rate has slightly increased. Compared to the Great Recession, the immediate effect of the pandemic on employment was swifter and more significant. However, the rate of employment recovery has so far been more rapid than during the Great Recession. If we look at the trend in LA County's unemployment rate over time, we see that the county's current rate of 10.5% is below the highest level seen during the Great Recession, which was 13.2% in September 2010. The unemployment rate in the county has been higher than for California as a whole throughout the pandemic. Throughout the pandemic, we experienced the greatest job loss associated with the measures taken to mitigate the spread of the virus between March and April, when more than 772,000 jobs fell off county non-farm payrolls. Since then, we have added around 47% of those jobs back. June continued to add non-farm employment in Los Angeles County. In June, 28,700 non-farm jobs were added to the payroll. Month over month, we saw almost 30,000 total non-farm jobs added, with gains in the accommodation and food services sector and in the arts, entertainment, and recreation sector combining for half of those gains. Educational services experienced a loss of 7,500 jobs from May to June. Overall, employment in LA County is significantly up across many industries since June of 2020. Though we are adding jobs back to payrolls on a monthly basis, we again see that overall, employment in LA County is significantly down across many industries since January 2020. For example, even though accommodation and food services added 7,500 jobs last month, the sector is still down by 91,200 jobs since January of 2020. Again, if we look at year-over-year employment trends, we see the hardest hit industries are trending upward, but still have quite a way to go before they reach pre-pandemic employment levels. As can be seen in this graph, the pandemic-induced recession has impacted industries differently. Unlike in past recessions, the decline and recovery of jobs from the pandemic-induced recession has been highly influenced by factors such as which types of businesses can effectively operate remotely during extended economic shutdowns and with COVID precautions in place. For example, the motion picture and sound recording industry has only gained about 20% of jobs lost in the industry during March and April of 2020. On the other hand, the transportation and warehousing industry has gained 141% of those jobs that were lost during those 2 months. We will now focus on some industries that have both fared relatively well in terms of employment during the pandemic and those that have been disproportionately negatively impacted. We will begin by reviewing industries that have fared relatively well during the pandemic. Most LA County industries have begun to show signs of recovery. However, some industries have experienced recovery significantly faster than others. The construction industry, for example, has had one of the most noticeable recoveries. As of June 2020, it has hovered between approximately 96% to 98% of January 2020 employment. This is largely due to safety guidelines that were put in place that allowed construction workers to return to job sites. In June 2021, the construction industry had employment that was 2% below the pre-pandemic January 2020 level. After experiencing a significant decrease in employment in March of 2020 of about 14% below January 2020 levels, construction quickly recovered and has steadily been approaching pre-pandemic job levels. In June, the professional business services industry had employment that was about 6% below the pre-pandemic January 2020 level. After experiencing a significant decrease in employment in March of 2020, of about 12% below January 2020 levels, the professional business services industry has steadily been recovering. In June, the financial activities industry had employment that was about 6% below the pre-pandemic January 2020 level. After experiencing a decrease in employment in March of 2020 to about 7% below January 2020 levels, the financial activities industry has remained steady, with monthly fluctuations of between 6 and 7% below January 2020 levels. Overall, industries that typically employ white-collar workers, such as the professional and business services and financial services industries, were less impacted by the pandemic when it came to employment loss throughout 2020. However, these industries still experienced declines throughout the pandemic that they have yet still not fully recovered. One reason why these industries experienced smaller overall changes in employment since January 2020 is because many workers in these industries have been able to work from home. In stark contrast to the current pandemic-induced recession, during the Great Recession, professional and business services and construction industries experienced some of the steepest declines in employment. For example, from the lowest level of employment in professional and business services industry during the Great Recession, which took place in May of 2009, it took until May of 2012 for the industry to recover to employment levels that existed before the recession. Next, we will zoom in on an industry that was disproportionately negatively affected by the pandemic. The leisure and hospitality industry has been hit very hard during the pandemic and has been slow to recover. In April 2020, employment in leisure and hospitality was 45% lower than what it was in January of that year. It then began to slightly recover over the summer, while taking another downturn in December of 2020 and January 2021. As of January 2021, the industry has been experiencing another recovery of jobs, though it is still far below January 2020 levels. Despite attempts at reopening, jobs recovery in the leisure and hospitality industry continues to be a challenge. Next, we will zoom in on two components of the leisure and hospitality industry. In June, arts, entertainment, and recreation had employment that was about 16% below the pre-pandemic January 2020 level. After experiencing a significant decrease in employment in April of 2020 of about 42% below January 2020 levels, arts, entertainment, and recreation has suffered significant job losses during the pandemic. Since January of this year, arts, entertainment, and recreation has been experiencing a significant jobs recovery, though it is still far below January 2020 levels. In June, accommodation and food services had employment that was about 20% below the pre-pandemic January 2020 level. After experiencing a significant decrease in employment in April of 2020 of about 46% below January 2020 levels, accommodation and food services has suffered significant job losses during the pandemic. Since January of this year, accommodation and food services has been experiencing a significant job recovery, though it is still far below January 2020 levels. Industries that cannot easily operate remotely have been particularly hard hit during the pandemic-induced recession. In 2020, job loss in the LA metro area was most extreme in May, at which point the area had almost 24% fewer jobs than it had in January. Over the summer and fall, the economy began to recover. The total number of jobs in the Los Angeles metro area showed strong signs of recovery from January to February of this year. However, job growth has plateaued since February, with the region fluctuating between about 7 and 8% fewer jobs than it had prior to the pandemic. Throughout the pandemic, Los Angeles has lost a greater share of pre-pandemic jobs than Sacramento and San Francisco, as well as more than the state of California. However, Los Angeles has been recovering jobs at a relatively fast pace. At the lowest point of job loss in May 2020, the Los Angeles metro area had lost almost 24% of total jobs. By January 2021, Los Angeles had recovered to 13.5% of pre-pandemic jobs loss, compared to 9.5% in San Francisco. In 2021, the LA metro area has experienced a rapid recovery of jobs. Looking at the percentage of pre-pandemic jobs recovered, we see that at the moment, the Los Angeles metro area's job recovery looks similar to that of San Francisco's. The Bureau of Labor Statistics' newest jobs data for May 2021 shows that Los Angeles and San Francisco now both have 7% fewer jobs than they did pre-pandemic. Looking at the percentage of pre-pandemic jobs recovered, we see that Los Angeles's job recovery looks similar to New York's. As mentioned before, at the lowest point of job loss, the Los Angeles metro area had lost about 24% of total jobs. Almost a year later, Los Angeles had recovered to 13.5% of pre-pandemic jobs loss, compared to 11.9% in New York. The Bureau of Labor Statistics' newest job data shows that New York and Los Angeles now both have 7% fewer jobs than they did pre-pandemic. Significant differences can be seen when looking at the share of jobs recovered in certain smaller metro areas that saw jobs recover quicker than in the LA metro area. For example, Austin, Denver, and Seattle have all significantly outperformed Los Angeles during the pandemic. We are now 4 months beyond the one-year mark when the Safer at Home order was issued on March 19th, 2020. Our recovery continues. There's much uncertainty regarding the impact of the Delta variant on the economy. Remember to stay diligent and to continue to take precautions. Our economic recovery depends on it. We will now take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Alexander. Appreciate that very much. I see in the Q&A box a couple of questions that have been offered by our friend Jaime Pacheco-Orozco, including some interest in understanding how employment opportunities and wages have disparately impacted individuals with disabilities during the pandemic. So, I mean, we know that people with disabilities have historically faced higher levels of unemployment and earned lower wages on average, and have also been more vulnerable to dislocation from employment during great economic disruptions, such as this pandemic and the great financial recession, in which not only was there a greater loss of jobs for people with disabilities, but it took longer for them to recover those jobs. And so far, the data appears to be similar during this recession. I've seen some data that said, while 1 in 7 American workers lost their jobs, in general, 1 in 5 with disabilities did. So it is having troublingly a disparate impact on those with disabilities. I see another question here in the chat from, or in the Q&A, from an anonymous attendee. For the jobs lost, is there an expectation those jobs return, or will some of those jobs not come back? That is true. Some will not come back, and we've talked about that in some of our prior briefings. There have been some permanent changes, as I alluded to, with consumer behavior shifting away from patronizing certain local customer-facing businesses and moving more to e-commerce. That has led to an increase in certain e-commerce-related jobs in warehousing and delivery. It has led to a significant reduction in brick-and-mortar retail jobs. And some of those brick-and-mortar retail jobs may simply not come back. But people who held those jobs have transferable skills. And we operate something called the Center for Competitive Workforce with our community college partners throughout the county. And we're encouraging folks to consider alternative careers if they are in a vulnerable industry sector where there may be permanent job losses. We don't have the exact numbers on how many of these jobs will eventually return, because we don't know exactly how consumer behavior will continue to shift in the months and years ahead. But we would assume that the trends that we have seen in play for many years around automation and globalization and climate change will continue to have impact on the nature of work and jobs and industries, and create new opportunities for people and maybe lessen other opportunities in other industries. So Well, we're working very hard to support and sustain our small businesses so that they can bring back their people. We recognize that not all of them will be able to, nor will even our largest businesses necessarily be able to return people to jobs for which there is less consumer demand. But new jobs and new opportunities are being created, and the trick is to help our educational systems and the consumers of our educational systems understand the changing nature of work so they can prepare themselves for new opportunities that are arising in our economy. I see a question here about, is there any correlation between job loss and gain and rates of COVID infection? Yes, although it's also related to the public health responses to the rates of COVID infection. So as COVID infections rise, public health departments occasionally have to institute limitations on the operation of business, and that definitely reduces jobs when businesses are not able to operate or operate to the extent that they had previously been. And of course, we saw as those restrictions were eased in the spring, we saw jobs coming back, though modestly they came back, I think, as Alexander reported, for about 4 or 5 months in a row. They've been coming back, I think, about mid 30,000s per month. In June, I think the preliminary estimates were about 28,000. But we're always concerned if the cases rise again and limitations on business activity are instituted again, that will lead to job loss again. Before I answer others, I don't know if Alexander would like to address any of these that I've addressed. Shannon was not able to be with us for the Q&A portion today, but Alexander, anything you want to add to the first 3 questions before I try and address some of the others in the remaining few minutes we have?
I think you're right on point, Bill.
Terrific. Thank you. I'm just looking to see other questions. Someone said, for those 7% fewer jobs, do you think Los Angeles will ever get those jobs back? We do. We're continuing to project, especially even if we were continuing to add them at 20 to 30,000 a month within the next couple of years, we would expect to get those back. But as I said, I think there will be new jobs emerging as relate to a number of our evolving industries. You hear us report frequently in our future forums and in our research reports from our Center for Competitive Workforce about emerging industries in this region and the changing nature of existing legacy industries as aerospace undergoes space commercialization, as entertainment shifts towards digital media and the digital content creation and distribution and exhibition of entertainment content, life sciences, personal and digital health, genomic medicine. There are so many areas where interesting new opportunities are being created in the region. And as we said, even with e-commerce, there are new opportunities being created. So we are optimistic, but impatient about the pace of job recovery. Let me see here. I see a question. Questions are popping around a little bit on my screen here. Can someone speak to the assistance the city will give to struggling small businesses, and how do you reach business owners that might not be proficient in English, might not be as plugged in? So there are city, county, and state services that we are engaged in connecting small businesses to. We do our outreach in multiple languages. We have people on our team, as does the Chamber in LISC LA, as does the city and county of Los Angeles and many of our other cities. Have technical assistance experts who speak multiple languages. We do outreach in multiple languages. And there is a great deal of additional assistance available, not only through our Together for LA partnership, but the state recently approved, and forgive me if I'm wrong, I think it was another $1.5 billion in small business grants as part of the governor's new budget that's been approved by the legislature. So there's substantial additional cash grants that will be available, and a variety of other forms of assistance coming through to small businesses. LA County's unemployment rate, the highest of all large urban counties. Why is that? How can we work to a lower rate? It has a lot to do with the makeup of our economy and the high prevalence of industries that were most severely impacted. So for instance, our entertainment industry was heavily impacted. We have the highest concentration of entertainment industry workers in the nation, particularly motion picture and television workers. And that industry was largely shut down and unable to continue production. And so it is still, by the way, substantially below its normal employment levels. Similarly, we're a world city, a world region with international tourism at the heart of many of our industry sectors. And international tourism, as we know, is at a fraction of its pre-pandemic levels. And that affects a city like Los Angeles more than other cities. And so it has a lot to do with the makeup of our industries as well as the makeup of our workforce. Let me see, Shannon briefly showed a slide of expectations for full recovery in 2023. And Tariq Marji is saying, not sure we'll be at pre-pandemic employment levels. So that remains of significant debate. There's a lot of people who think we'll be back to pre-pandemic employment levels by 2022. We've been projecting 2023, as I recall, pretty consistently. Some people believe it could take until 2024. That would be faster than recovery from the Great Recession, which took several years. But it's difficult to project. At current levels, it probably will take until 2023. I see Patrick Gittes asking, how does this impact the location quotient as it relates to priority industry sectors? I think the question there is relate to what I said earlier, where we have a high concentration of certain industries in Los Angeles that have been impacted. I guess the question is, if we have less jobs in those industries here that have high location quotients, will that temporarily reduce the concentration of jobs? Yes, would be the answer, to the extent that that industry is impacted here and in certain other major production centers more than in other industries. And it depends on how you're defining the work going on in that industry sector. If you look at a larger definition of a sector, there may be a different impact than a narrower definition of that section when you're looking at location quotients. Sorry to jump around a lot, but we had a lot of questions today, and we only have 1 minute left, so I don't know if Alexander wants to shed any more light on anything else here that we haven't yet covered. Alexander, any final thoughts from you on any of these questions?
I think you've covered them pretty effectively, Bill.
Well, I appreciate that. And again, we appreciate everybody being with us. We do this as a 45-minute session out of respect for the pressing time demands on all of you. We have an event coming up on July 27. I think it's 11 in the morning or 11:30 about our Together for LA re-kickoff for the new year. Information about that is on our website, both at togetherforla.org and at laedc.org. I don't know if Ricardo has any final messages to wrap us up, but I want to thank you all for being here, for being partners in our work, and for hearing my message that I began with and will close with. We are not done with recovery and reinvention of our regional economy. We got a long way to go. We need all of you as partners, and we look forward to working shoulder to shoulder with you until every job has been recovered, whether it's in the same prior employment someone had or in a new sector opportunity. We need to get all the folks who have such talent to offer in our communities back to being contributors to the great productivity of the LA County economy. Ricardo?
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Shannon and Alexander, for these very insightful presentations and also for fielding all the questions. Just a few points before we close out. Everyone will receive an email later this week, which will contain the presentation as well as the recording of this session. And in the meantime, we do recommend that you visit our LAEDC COVID-19 response page for additional resources. And if you have any other questions that you would like answered from these webinars, you can email me at ricardo.ruffolo@laedc.org or my colleague Shane Cullen at shane.cullen@laedc.org. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Stay safe, everybody. Wear your masks, get vaccinated. Let's get past this virus. Have a great day.